The stories from kochvei Masyos u'misholim. The first story, the thief. Once there was a poor man who sat in the synagogue and studied Torah. An astrologer, in Yiddish Rosh Bit, came to the city, and the entire populace ran to him. The poor man, however, did not go. When his wife came to the synagogue, she did not find anyone there other than her husband, since everyone else had gone to the astrologer. She began screaming at him, "You are a lazy, hapless beggar. Why don't you go to the astrologer?" He did not want to go, but his wife kept pressing him until he had no choice. When he finally got to the astrologer told him that it was his destiny to be a thief. The man returned to the synagogue, to his Torah study. His wife came to him and asked, "What did he tell you?" "He told me that I am a poor man, and I will remain a poor man," replied her husband. That night he came home and ate a piece of bread as his main meal. During the meal he began to laugh. His wife asked him, "Why are you laughing?" "You must know something that you're not telling me." "No," he replied. "He did not tell me anything. I'm just laughing for the fun of it." He continued eating, and suddenly he laughed again. When his wife asked him why, he replied to her as before. Then all of a sudden he began to roar with laughter. She said to him, "Now I'm sure that you know something," he replied. "Now I'm sure that you know something." He replied, "Yes, it's true. The astrologer told me that it is my destiny to be a thief." His wife replied, "I do not want you to be a thief. It is better that we remain poor. Let us accept what God gives us. Don't become a thief." When the Shabbos came, they had everything that they needed. They had bread and everything else. When they sat down to eat, they had 4 or 5 girls, and the girls grabbed the bread, since there was not enough for all of them. The wife said, "Lord of the universe, it is so disgusting to me to be so poor." Addressing her husband, she said, "I would rather have you be a thief so that we would not be poor, so that we should not be so poor." The poor man did not have any choice but to obey her. In Yiddish, whether he wanted to go or not, he went anyway. He wanted to, he did not want to, but he went all the same. He wanted to, he did not want to, but he went all the same. The Rebbe used this expression several times when he told the story. The husband went out to steal. His first victim was the wealthiest man in town. When he got there, he found the watchman sleeping, and no one asked him a thing. He went to the store and found the lock open, since this was his destiny. When he went to the strong box, it was also unlocked. He took 4 or 5 rubles, just enough to support himself, and brought them to his wife. "I did as you asked," he said. "This should be enough to support us, but I don't want to have to steal again." "I agree with you completely," she replied. "I also don't want you ever to steal again. We only had to do it this time since things were so tight." But then, once again, an occasion arose when she screamed at him, "Beggar! Hapless fool! You were in the store already. Why didn't you take enough to buy me a coat, a yippah?" The man had to go steal again. When he got there, he found another thief. "Who are you?" he asked. "A thief," replied the other. "Who are you?" "Also a thief," replied the poor man. "Let's be partners in crime. This is my destiny, and I know that I will be successful." They agreed. However, the poor man began to think, "If we steal here, we will impoverish our victim. When I was alone, I would only steal enough for a coat for my wife. But now we will steal very much, and the victim will remain without anything. Why should we make a fellow Jew suffer a loss?" he said to the other. "Better let us steal from a Gentile." They agreed to this and decided to steal from the king who lived in that city. The poor man was sure that he would be successful, since that was his destiny. The thief said, "The best thing to steal would be the outfit the king wore at his coronation. This is so valuable that it would suffice us for many generations. I know where these clothes are kept." The poor man agreed. He was sure that he would be able to steal them, since this was his destiny. They went to the palace and went from one room to another, and finally came to the garments. The garments were very precious, and this is what they took. They then began to argue. there was one large garment and one small garment. The thief said that since he was the one who knew about them, he should get the larger one. The poor man, on the other hand, said that he deserved it, since he was the man of destiny, and it was because of destiny that the theft was successful. "Let us take our dispute to the king," declared the poor man. "How could you possibly do that?" asked the thief. "It does not matter," said the poor man. I will go and ask him." "If you do that," said the thief, "and actually ask the king, then I will give you the large garment of my own accord." The thief went with him to the king. Reclining next to the king was a man who told the king stories to put him to sleep. The two of them took the bed with the king sleeping on it and carried it to another room. When the king woke up, he thought that he was in his usual place. The poor man began to tell the king the story of the two thieves. When he ended, he asked the king, "Who deserves the larger garment?" The king became very angry. "Why are you asking me such a simple question?" he said. "It obviously should go to the poor man, since it is because of his destiny that the theft was successful. Now, you'd better tell me a story." The poor man told him a story, and the king fell asleep. They then carried the bed back to its original room. In the morning, it was discovered that the king's royal garments had been stolen. The king remembered that the one reclining near him had asked who should get the larger garment. The regular storyteller was therefore beaten, but he said that he knew nothing about it. They beat and tortured him very much, but he kept on insisting that he did not know anything about the theft. The king sent for the archbishop, called Archrigo, to ask him about these strange happenings, and if it was possible that the storyteller really was not the thief. The archbishop said that it was possible that he was ignorant of the crime. He also said that the king was foolish to say that the larger garment belonged to the poor man. The king became very angry with the archbishop and wanted to punish him, but he could do nothing. Meanwhile, the thieves were being sought, but they could not be found. Finally, the king ordered that an announcement be made that whoever had perpetrated the theft should come out, and he would not be harmed. The king felt that he had to satisfy his curiosity as to how the garments were stolen. There were many people around him talking about the case. Finally, the poor man came and asked the people what they were speaking about. When they told him, he said, "What's the fuss? The one who stole will return." The people rebuked him. When he asked the second time, they rebuked him again. "Beggar, you deserve to be killed. It is being said that you know something about the theft." "Yes," replied the poor man, "I know who the thief is." "If you know, then you must tell," they said. "I will tell," he replied. The poor man came to the king and said, "I know who the thief is." "I would very much like to see the thief," replied the king. "I am he," said the poor man. The king kissed him and asked, "How did you do it?" The poor man told him the entire story. They caught the other thief, and he had to return the second garment which he had. The king then said to the poor man, "I would like you to play a similar trick on the archbishop, since I am very angry with him." The poor man said, "Give me a set of vestments like the archbishop wears during his service. I will also need a large number of turtles, rakis, captured for me. Besides that, I will need many candles." The poor man put on the vestments and attached a candle to each turtle. He then stood at the altar and began to scream. Everyone gathered, and the archbishop came with them. The archbishop was very frightened, since he saw fires and heard a voice crying out, but did not know what it was. The poor man said to the archbishop, "I have come for you. I want to bring you into paradise immediately." The archbishop fell on his face. "Before I take you to paradise," said the poor man, "I must first bring you through purgatory for a short time. Then I will bring you to paradise. First, you must get into my sack." When the archbishop was in the sack, the poor man carried him to the king. The sack was hung up in the palace courtyard, and the king was informed. People came and saw the sack hanging with someone obviously inside it, and they began to throw stones at it. The archbishop was severely wounded, and all his teeth were broken. The archbishop did not know what was happening. Was this purgatory as he had been told, or was it all a trick? After he had been well beaten, the king gave orders to cut him down. The sack was cut down and opened, and the archbishop left in humiliation. In another version it says, "In the end he was hung, since the end of a thief is hanging." While he was being brought, the evil one walked alongside with a sack of shoes, and he said, I wore out all these shoes until I finally brought you to this. Faith. There was once a poor man who earned a living by digging clay and selling it. Once, while digging clay, he discovered a precious stone which was obviously worth a great deal. Since he had no idea of its worth, he took it to an expert to tell him its value. The expert answered, no one here will be able to afford such a stone. Go to London, the capital, and there you will be able to sell it. The man was so poor that he could not afford to make the journey. He sold everything he had and went from house to house collecting funds for the trip. Finally, he had enough to take him as far as the sea. He then wanted to board a ship, but he did not have any money. He went to a ship's captain and showed him the jewel. The captain immediately welcomed him aboard the ship with great honor, assuming that he was a very trustworthy person. He gave the poor man a special first-class cabin and treated him like a wealthy personage. The poor man's cabin had a view of the sea, and he sat there, constantly looking at the diamond and rejoicing. He was especially particular to do this during his meals, since eating in such good spirits is highly beneficial for the digestion. Then, one day, he sat down to eat, with the diamond lying in front of him on the table where he could enjoy it. Sitting there, he dozed off. Meanwhile, the mess boy came and cleared the table, shaking the tablecloth with its crumbs and the diamond into the sea. When he woke up and realized what had happened, he almost went mad with grief. Besides, the captain was a ruthless man who would not hesitate to kill him for his fare. Having no other choice, he continued to act happy, as if nothing had happened. The captain would usually speak to him a few hours every day, and on this day he put himself in good spirits, so that the captain was not aware that anything was wrong. The captain said to him, I want to buy a large quantity of wheat, and I will be able to sell it in London for a huge profit. But I am afraid that I will be accused of stealing from the king's treasury. Therefore, I will arrange for the wheat to be bought in your name. I will pay you well for your trouble. The poor man agreed, but as soon as they arrived in London, the captain died. The entire shipload of wheat was in the poor man's name, and it was worth many times as much as the diamond. Many times as much as the diamond. Rabbi Nachman concluded, the diamond did not belong to the poor man, and the proof is that he did not keep it. The wheat, however, did belong to him, and the proof is that he kept it. But he got what he deserved only because he remained happy. Nanach Nachmo, Nachmo Mimon. Kapsen Pasha. Once, there was a court Jew who was very much favored by the Turkish Sultan, more than any of the other ministers of state. The Sultan was very fond of him, more than anyone else in his government. Every day, the Sultan would invite him to his palace to spend time with him. The other royal ministers grew jealous of him and devised plots to denounce him to the Sultan and destroy him. Among the ministers, there was a pasha named Kapsen Pasha, who hated this Jew more than anyone else in the government. When he was with the court Jew, he behaved like a close friend, but every day he would devise plots to denounce the Jew before the Sultan. Once the Pasha came to the Jew and began to speak to him. He maliciously told him, I was with the Sultan, and I heard him say that he is very fond of you. There is, however, one thing that bothers him. Whenever you come to him and speak with him, he can't stand your bad breath. Since he does not want to avoid you, this troubles him very much. My advice is that when you come to the Sultan, you should place a perfumed handkerchief over your mouth. This will cover up your bad breath, so that it will not disturb the Sultan. In his innocence, the Jew believed him and agreed to follow his advice. The Pasha then went to the Sultan and told him that he had heard the Jew say that he suffers very much, since whenever he speaks to the Sultan, he has to smell the Sultan's bad breath. Therefore, said the Pasha, whenever the Jew comes to you, he will place a perfumed handkerchief over his mouth, so that he will not smell your breath. And if you don't believe me, this is proof. Tomorrow, when the Jew comes, he will have a handkerchief over his mouth. When the Sultan heard this, he became very angry. He said, I will see if you are telling the truth. If it is true, I will destroy that Jew. The next day, when the Jew came to the Sultan, he placed the handkerchief over his mouth, just as the Pasha had advised him, since he had believed him. When the Sultan saw that, he understood that the Pasha had been telling the truth. He immediately wrote a note saying, when the bearer of this note arrives, immediately throw him into the furnace where all those who are sentenced to death are cast." The Sultan then sealed the letter with his signet and said to the Jew, "Do me a favor and personally deliver this note to the man whose address is written on the envelope." The Jew took the letter and promised the Sultan that he would do as he requested, not knowing what was written in the letter. The court Jew was very diligent to keep the commandment to circumcise Jewish children. Whenever he was honored to perform a circumcision, chituch, he would not pay attention to any obstacle, since this commandment was very precious to him. On that very day, when he was supposed to deliver the Sultan's letter to the place it was sent, God arranged to save his good friend. He made it happen that a man came from a village and honored the court Jew to travel with him to the village to circumcise his son. The custom of the court Jew was not to avoid performing this precept, no matter what the circumstances. He began to think, "What will I do to fulfill the Sultan's request that I delivered the letter?" God then arranged that he should meet Kapsan Pasha. The court Jew told the Pasha that he had been with the Sultan and that the Sultan had given him a letter to deliver. But now God had arranged that he could perform a circumcision, and his custom was not to set aside this commandment for any reason whatever. Therefore he said, "I am asking you to do me a favor. Please, if you would, take the letter and deliver it there." The Pasha was very happy at the turn of events, since now he would also be able to denounce the Jew for not delivering the letter as the Sultan had ordered. He immediately took the letter and delivered it to the one to whom it was addressed. The recipient was the executioner in charge of burning those who had been sentenced to death by the Sultan. He immediately grabbed the Pasha and threw him into the furnace. He was burned as he had been judged by God, and was thus punished measure for measure, mida keneged mida. The Jew, meanwhile, did not know anything about this, and the next day he appeared before the Sultan as if nothing had happened. When the Sultan saw him, he was very surprised. Didn't you deliver the letter that I gave you?" he asked. The Jew replied, "Your Majesty, I gave the letter to Kapsan Pasha to deliver. God gave me the opportunity to perform a circumcision, and the custom is not to pass over this opportunity whenever it presents itself." The Sultan then understood that there was a reason that the Pasha had been burned, and that it was because he had slandered the Jew. The Sultan asked him, "How come you hold a perfumed handkerchief over your mouth when you speak to me?" "The Pasha advised me to," replied the Jew. "He told me that he heard you saying that you couldn't stand my bad breath." The Sultan then told him how the Pasha had slandered the Jew. He said, "The Pasha said that you couldn't stand my bad breath, and that you were putting the perfumed handkerchief over your mouth to avoid smelling it." The Sultan then revealed to the Jew the contents of the letter. He said, "Now I know that God has power over the world, and he saved his friend from all evil. What the Pasha wanted to do to you was done to him. He was paid back as he deserved." The Jew was now all the more esteemed by the Sultan, more so than any of his ministers of state. He was very highly esteemed and dear to him. Simplicity. God wins battles merely because of the simple folk who recite psalms with simplicity, and not through those who use sophisticated means. A king once went hunting, Navlovia, and he traveled like a simple man, so that he would have freedom of movement. Suddenly a heavy rain fell, literally like a flood. The ministers scattered in all directions, and the king was in great danger. He searched until he found the house of a villager. The villager invited the king in and offered him some groats. He lit the stove and let the king sleep on the pallet. Piklik. This was very sweet and pleasant for the king. He was so tired and exhausted that it seemed as if he had never had such a pleasurable experience. Meanwhile, the royal ministers sought the king until they found him in this house, where they saw the king sleeping. They wanted him to return to the palace with them. "You did not even attempt to rescue me," said the king. "Each one of you ran to save himself. But this man rescued me. Here I had the sweetest experience. Therefore, he will bring me back in his wagon in these clothes, and he will sit with me on my throne." Rabbi Nachman concluded by saying that it is said that before the Mashiach comes, there will be flood. People will be flooded with atheism. It will not be a flood of water, but of immorality. And Mem Zayin, which can mean Mayim Zaydim or Machshavos Zoros, foreign thoughts. It will cover all the high mountains. Even in the Holy Land where the original flood did not reach, but this time it will come with such strength that the water will splash over the land. This means that it will have an effect even in virtuous hearts. There will be no way to combat this with sophistication. All the royal ministers will be scattered, and the entire kingdom will not be firm on its foundation. The only ones who will uphold it will be the simple Jews who recite psalms in simplicity. Therefore, when the Messiah comes, they will be the ones to place the crown on his head. Once a man was traveling with his teamster to Berlin and other large cities. The man went aside to attend his needs, and the driver, whose name was Ivan, remained with the coach in the middle of the street. A soldier came along and said, "Why is it standing there? Who is it? Why is it standing there? Who is it?" In German, "who is it" is wer du, or as pronounced in Yiddish, wer du. The driver thought that the soldier was asking his name, so he replied, "Ivan." The soldier gave him a blow to the head. "Wer du?" he demanded. "Ivan," screamed the driver. The soldier hit him again and shouted, "Wer du?" Finally, the soldier took him and the wagon to a side street. When the man came back, he looked around until he found his coach. He said to the driver, "Ivan." The driver was terrified. "Don't call me Ivan," he said. "Call me Wer du." When they finally left the city, he said, "Now you can call me Ivan. There my name was Wer du, but here my name is Ivan." Rabbi Nachman concluded by saying, "By me it is Wer du," that is, who is it? One knows his lowly status. Also, when the body Ivan is purified, it is called who and what. But when people leave me, then they become Ivan again, since the physical remains physical. The bitter herb. Once, a Jew and a German Gentile were traveling as hobos together. The Jew told the German to make believe that he was a Jew, since their language was similar, and the Jews would have pity on him. Since Passover was approaching, he taught him how to act when he is invited to a Seder. He told him that at every Seder, Kiddush is made, and the hands are washed. However, he forgot to tell him about the bitter herb. He was invited to a house, and being very hungry from all day, looked forward to the fine foods that had been described by the Jew. However, first they gave him a piece of celery, karpas, dipped in salt water, and other things served at the Seder. They then began to recite the Agadah, and he sat there longing for the meal. When the matzah was served, he was very happy. Then they gave him a piece of horseradish for the bitter herb. It was bitter to taste, and he thought that this was the entire meal. He ran from the house, bitter and hungry, saying to himself, "Cursed Jews! After all that ceremony, that's all they serve to eat." He went to the synagogue and fell asleep. After a while, the Jew arrived, happy and full from a good meal. "How was your Seder?" he asked. The other told him what had happened. "Stupid German," replied the Jew. "If you had waited just a little longer, you would have had a fine meal as I had." The same is true when one wants to come close to God. After all the effort to begin, one is given a little bitterness. This bitterness is needed to purify the body, but the person might think that this bitterness is all there is to serving God, so he runs away from it. But if he waited a short while and allowed his body to be purified, then he would feel every joy and delight in the world in his closeness to God. The treasure. A man once dreamed that there was a great treasure under a bridge in Vienna. He traveled to Vienna and stood near the bridge, trying to figure out what to do. He did not dare search for the treasure by day because of the many people who were there. An officer passed by and asked, "What are you doing?" "Standing here and contemplating." The man decided that it would be best to tell the whole story and ask for help, hoping that the officer would share the treasure with him. He told the officer the entire story. The officer replied, "A Jew is concerned only with dreams. I also had a dream, and I also saw a treasure. It was in a small house under the cellar." In relating his dream, the officer accurately described the man's city and house. He rushed home, dug under his cellar, and found the treasure. He said, "Now I know that I had the treasure all along, but in order to find it, I had to travel to Vienna." The same is true in serving God. Each person has the treasure, but in order to find it, he must travel to the tzaddik. The Turkey prince. A royal prince once became mad and thought that he was a turkey. He felt compelled to sit naked under the table, pecking at bones and pieces of bread like a turkey. The royal physicians all gave up hope of ever curing him of this madness, and the king suffered tremendous grief. A sage then came and said, "I will undertake to cure him." The sage undressed and sat naked under the table next to the prince, picking crumbs and bones. "Who are you?" asked the prince. "What are you doing here?" "And you?" replied the sage. "What are you doing here?" "I am a turkey," said the prince. "I am also a turkey," answered the sage. They sat together like this for some time until they became good friends. One day, the sage signaled the king's servants to throw him shirts. He said to the prince, "What makes you think that a turkey can't wear a shirt?" "You can wear a shirt and still be a turkey." With that, the two of them put on shirts. After a while, he signaled them again, and they threw him a pair of pants. Just as before, he said, "What makes you think that you can't be a turkey if you wear pants?" The sage continued in this manner until they were both completely dressed. Then he signaled again, and they were given regular food from the table. Again the sage said, "What makes you think that you will stop being a turkey if you eat good food? You can eat whatever you want and still be a turkey." They both ate the food. Finally the sage said, "What makes you think a turkey must sit under the table? Even a turkey can sit at the table." The sage continued in this manner until the prince was completely cured. The tainted grain. A king once told his prime minister, who was also his good friend, "I see in the stars that whoever eats any grain that grows this year will go mad. What is your advice?" The prime minister replied, "We must put aside enough grain so that we will not have to eat from this year's harvest." The king objected, "But then we will be the only ones who will be sane. Everyone else will be mad. Therefore, they will think that we are the mad ones. It is impossible for us to put aside enough grain for everyone. Therefore, we too must eat this year's grain. But we will make a mark on our foreheads so that at least we will know that we are mad. I will look at your forehead, and you will look at mine, and when we see this sign, we will know that we are both mad." The deer. Once a king was pursuing a deer, but he could not catch it. The royal ministers caught up with him and said, "Your Majesty, let's go back." "I must capture the deer," replied the king, "but whoever wishes to go back can go back." The bird. There was once a king who was a great astrologer. One year he saw in the stars that if the wheat was not harvested before a certain time, all the wheat would be ruined. He saw that there was not much time. He came up with the idea that he would give the harvesters every possible pleasure and all their needs, so that they would have a clear mind to work day and night. Then they would finish the harvest before the deadline. However, the workers took what the king sent them, and they enjoyed themselves so much that they forgot to work on the harvest. The time came, and the wheat was not harvested, so that it became completely ruined. The people did not know what to do. They realized that the king would be terribly angry with them. A sage gave them an idea. The king was very fond of a certain type of bird. If they could bring him such a bird, he would have so much pleasure from it, he would forgive everything. However, it was very difficult to capture this bird, since it lived very high up. They did not have a ladder, and there was no time to get one. The sage once again gave them an idea. Since they were many men, one would be able to stand on the shoulders of the other, making a human ladder to reach the bird. They liked the idea, but began to argue, since each one wanted to be on top. They wasted time arguing until the bird flew away. The king then remained angry at them for neglecting to harvest the wheat on time. The idea is that God created man and gave him every pleasure, all so that he should cut the grain before he is harmed through blemishing. Also that he should cut the grain before he is harmed through blemishing the covenant of Avram, Pagam Bris. People would then be able to serve God with a clear mind. But they neglected it through their enjoyment until they forgot the grain and let their minds be ruined. Nevertheless, there was still hope through the bird, who is the tzaddik, since through him everything could be forgiven. But then there was arguing and strife, since each one wanted to be on top. They were thus kept from binding themselves to the tzaddik. Nanach, nachmo, nachmo miyumon, ma'odai kushali, redis alachu tamid yayuka, la'agidachu kinesi mi'oy ma'budisachu, lachu matu ma'fayr of the clean, bis Mashiach lekimen, chazak mi'amatz ba'budisachu, nanach, nachmo, nachmo miyumon. אם זה הגל לחסוי והיא מולה בקודש בקבלקה שר בצד יקי וחיזוק עבודת תמינאי זה מגזר מטעם זיון מי שאין חמסנה ננח נחמו מימון